The words hit harder than any physical blow ever could. You have 2 weeks to get out. I stood in the kitchen of the house I'd grown up in, staring at my father's face, cold, determined, final. My mother sat at the table behind him, looking anywhere but at me. My younger brother Marcus wouldn't even meet my eyes. "Dad, I'm still looking for jobs," I said, my voice trembling. "I just graduated. Everyone takes time to." "Everyone doesn't live under my roof while they figure it out," he interrupted. "You're 22 years old, Victoria. You should have a plan. You should have a career. Instead, you have excuses." The truth was, I did have excuses. I'd failed my college entrance exams twice. I dropped out of community college after 1 semester. I'd worked 3 part-time jobs in the past year, none of them leading anywhere. By every measurable standard, I was a failure. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Sorry doesn't pay bills." My mother finally spoke, her voice devoid of emotion. "Your father has decided. You need to leave. 2 weeks. 14 days to figure out how to survive in a city where I had no plan, no prospects, and no one who believed in me. Not even myself." That night, I packed everything I owned into garbage bags and cardboard boxes. And I made a silent promise I would become someone they regretted losing. 14 days later, I sat in my 2002 Honda Civic with everything I owned stacked in the back seat. No apartment, no job, no idea what came next. The homeless shelter was full, so I parked in a 24-hour gym parking lot. I had enough money for a membership and food for 3 weeks if I was careful. After that, I had nothing. That first night, I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. Not from sadness, but from anger. Pure white-hot rage. At my family for giving up on me. At myself for disappointing them. At the world for not understanding that sometimes people need more than 2 weeks to find their footing. But somewhere around 3 a.m., something shifted. I was tired of crying. Tired of feeling sorry for myself. Tired of being the girl my family had written off as a failure. I opened my phone and started researching. Not college programs or job listings. Something different. I started reading about people who'd built empires from nothing. People who'd been told they couldn't do something and did it anyway. By sunrise, I had a plan. Not a perfect one. Not even a good one, really. But it was something. It was action. And action was better than despair. I'd always been good at one thing, understanding people. Not in a formal, studied way, but innately. I could read a room. I could sense what someone needed to hear. I could make connections between people. So I started a service. No capital required. No degree needed. I called it Victoria's Network. My pitch was simple. I would connect people. Businesses to talent. Job seekers to opportunities. Lonely people to communities. I'd charge a small finder's fee if the connection worked out. It was basic, almost childish in its simplicity. But it worked. My first success was connecting a woman looking for a nanny to a nursing student who needed flexible work. My second was introducing a man who just started a small business to someone with marketing experience. Small wins, but they were wins. Within 2 months, I'd made enough money to move into a shared apartment with 3 roommates. Within 4 months, I'd made enough to get my own studio apartment in a not great neighborhood. My family had no idea. They probably assumed I was still struggling, still broken, still the failure they'd kicked out. 5 months after being evicted, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Victoria," she said, surprised I'd picked up. We haven't heard from you in a long time." Part of me wanted to hang up. Part of me wanted to make her feel as small as she'd made me feel. But I was learning something new. Growth meant I didn't have to destroy people who'd hurt me. "Hi, Mom," I said calmly. "How did you get this number?" "You listed it on your LinkedIn profile," she said. I heard confusion in her voice. You're running a networking company?" That's when I realized something. My success was public. She'd been able to find me because I'd stopped hiding. Because I'd started building something visible. "It's more like a freelance service," I explained. "Connecting people who need each other." That sounds impressive," she said quietly. "Your father and I were wondering if you wanted to come to dinner. Marcus's girlfriend is visiting and we thought." I let the silence hang. 1 word from me and she'd be relieved. 1 acceptance and things could go back to the way they were. Except I didn't want things to go back. I wanted them to move forward into something different. I'll think about it, I said. I've been busy. After we hung up, I realized something important. She was reaching out because she'd seen my success. Not because she'd realized her mistake, but because I was no longer someone she could dismiss. 1 year after being kicked out, Victoria's network had connected over 200 people. Some connections led to marriages. Some led to business partnerships. Some led to lifelong friendships. And I was making real money. Enough to move to a nicer apartment. Enough to buy a reliable car. Enough to live comfortably instead of just surviving. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was internal. I'd gone to therapy. I'd figured out that my need to please my family had been destroying me. I'd learned that failure wasn't permanent. It was just a learning experience. I'd stopped measuring my worth by their opinion and started measuring it by my own actions. I was different now. More confident. More capable. More myself. The irony was that the thing my family had rejected in me, my unconventional path, my willingness to try something nobody had ever heard of, was the exact thing that had saved me. I still hadn't accepted their dinner invitation. They'd asked 3 more times. Each time I deflected. Not out of anger, but because I needed to understand something first. Why would I want to rebuild a relationship with people who'd abandoned me when I needed them most? 18 months after my eviction, my brother showed up at my office. Not my family's home. Not a neutral location. My office. The small space I'd rented downtown, where I worked, was surrounded by business cards and connection lists and the physical evidence of my success. "Victoria," he said nervously from the doorway. Marcus looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just grown larger. He was struggling. I could see it in how he carried himself. Something was wrong. "Marcus, hey," I said, gesturing for him to sit. "What's going on?" He took a deep breath. "I need your help, and I'm not sure you'll want to give it to me, and I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, but I'm in trouble." He explained that he'd dropped out of college, that he'd been trying to figure out what to do with his life. That Dad had given him the same ultimatum he'd given me, get your life together or get out. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, tears in his eyes, "for how we treated you, for not standing up for you, for not staying in touch. I could have said no. I could have turned him away, let him experience what I'd experienced. But I realized that wouldn't make me feel better. It would just make me like them. Tell me what you're interested in," I said instead, "and I'll help you figure it out. But I'm not going to save you. You're going to save yourself. I'm just going to help you see that you can." As I was helping Marcus navigate his options, he mentioned something that changed everything. Dad had lost his job. Not just lost it, been fired from it. Apparently, his company had downsized, and in 40 years of working for the same organization, he'd become expendable. He was now 62 years old, unemployed, with no plan for the future. The irony was almost too much to bear. The man who'd kicked me out for being a failure was now a failure himself. The man who demanded I have a plan had no plan. The man who'd given me 2 weeks to figure out my life was now facing a lifetime of financial uncertainty. My mother had called repeatedly, but I'd let the calls go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear her voice. I wasn't ready to forgive. But I was also starting to realize something. My success had been built partly on anger, partly on spite. And while those were powerful motivators, they weren't sustainable. Eventually, I'd have to let the anger go. The question was, when? 2 years after my eviction, I got an email from a venture capitalist. Apparently, my work in the networking space had caught the attention of a larger company. They wanted to acquire Victoria's network and turn it into a full-scale tech platform. The offer was substantial. Enough money to secure my future for decades. Enough to do whatever I wanted. Enough to prove, definitively, that I was not a failure. I accepted the deal. And then I cried. Not because I was happy, but because I realized I'd been waiting for external validation my whole life. First from my family, now from investors and business people. When would it be enough? 6 months after selling Victoria's network, I had time to think about what came next. And I couldn't stop thinking about my family. My father was still unemployed. My mother had gone back to work part-time at a retail store, something she'd stopped doing when she got married. Marcus was trying to build a freelance career and struggling. And I had enough money to never work another day. The unfairness of it consumed me. They'd rejected me when I was broken. Now they were broken, and I had all the resources they needed. I called my therapist and talked through it. They don't deserve your help, she said. But you might deserve the peace that comes from giving it. That distinction changed everything. This wasn't about what they deserved. It was about what I needed to become. So I called my mother. I'd like to have that dinner, I said. But I want to talk about something serious first. We met at a neutral restaurant. Just my parents and me. No Marcus. This needed to happen with the people who'd made the decision. Before we talk about anything else, I said, I need you to understand something. I was hurt. I was angry. I am still angry some days. But I've built a life without you. A successful one. And I need you to know that not because I want you to feel guilty, but because it's important for this conversation. My father looked ashamed. My mother looked relieved. I sold my company, I continued, for a significant amount of money. I'm financially secure for the rest of my life. And I know you're struggling. And I'm going to help you. But it's not going to be because I've forgiven you. It's going to be because I'm choosing to be someone bigger than the hurt. Victoria, my mother started to cry. Let me finish, I said, my voice steady. I'm going to set up trust funds for each of you. Not to get you out of your mess, but to give you a foundation while you figure out your own solutions. Because the most important thing I learned from being kicked out is that being saved isn't the same as saving yourself. My father couldn't even look at me. The second thing, I continued, is that I can't rebuild our relationship the way it was. Because that relationship was built on performance and conditional love. Moving forward, it's going to be built on honesty and boundaries. I'll be here for you. But not as the daughter you can reject and reclaim when it's convenient. I followed through on my promise. I set up financial assistance that was enough to help, but not so much that it enabled them to avoid doing their own work. My father went back to school to learn new skills. My mother continued her retail job but also took online courses in something she was passionate about. And something surprising happened. They started respecting me. Not because I'd given them money. Because I'd given them boundaries and still cared about them. Because I'd shown them that love and consequences could coexist. My father started attending job training seminars. He eventually landed a position in a different field. My mother discovered she loved teaching and went back to school for her certification. They were building new lives. Not the lives they'd planned, but real lives, lived with more intention than they'd had before. 3 years after being evicted, I was looking for a new office space. Something bigger. Something that reflected where I'd come from and where I was going. My father called. Victoria, I found a space you might like. My firm is expanding, and we're not using the entire floor. You could rent from us at below market rate. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was now trying to help me the way I'd helped him. Except I didn't need his help. I could afford any space I wanted. But I took it anyway. Not because I needed him, but because taking it meant accepting that people could change. That relationships could evolve. Thank you, I said. But I'm going to pay full market rate. I don't need help. I just need a family. He got quiet. I understand, he said finally. And I'm sorry. Not just for kicking you out. For everything before that. With the new office space, I decided to restart Victoria's network as a nonprofit. Not a for-profit company looking for the next acquisition, but an organization dedicated to helping people who'd fallen through the cracks. My family thought I was insane. I had enough money to live luxuriously forever. Why would I work? But they didn't understand that success wasn't about money. It was about meaning. It was about building something that mattered. My mother volunteered. My father consulted on business strategy. Even Marcus got involved, helping to market the organization. We weren't a perfect family, but we were becoming real. A journalist found out about me, not because I was rich, but because I was helping people in a meaningful way. The story she wrote was titled, From Homeless to Philanthropist, How One Woman Rebuilt Her Life After Being Rejected by Her Family. It went viral. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know my story. How I'd gone from living in my car to building a successful company to creating a nonprofit that had already helped 500 people. I did interviews. I told my story. And I made sure to mention my family. Not to embarrass them, but to show the complexity of what had happened. My father watched one of the interviews. Afterward, he called me. I'm proud of you, he said. And I'm sorry it took me until now to tell you that. Those words meant more than any amount of money ever could. As the nonprofit grew, I started receiving messages from people with stories like mine. Families torn apart by expectation. Kids rejected for not fitting the mold. Individuals struggling because they'd been told they were failures. I started a mentorship program. I paired successful people with people who felt stuck. I created workshops on resilience. I wrote about my own experience with brutal honesty. And something unexpected happened, helping other people let go of my anger toward my family. Not forgiveness, exactly, but acceptance. Understanding that they'd done the best they could with the emotional tools they had. And that my job wasn't to punish them or even to fix them, but to be the person I'd become despite their rejection. 5 years after my eviction, my family did something surprising. They organized a celebration dinner specifically to honor me. Not a family dinner, a public dinner. With my mates, my team, my friends. They wanted to acknowledge what I'd built and how I'd grown. I almost didn't go. I was suspicious of the motive. I was afraid it would feel performative. I was afraid of what it would mean to accept their acknowledgement. But I went, and it was beautiful. People stood up and talked about how my work had changed their lives. My father got emotional talking about how proud he was. My mother gave a speech about learning to let go and watch your children become themselves. And I realized something. They were still learning, still growing, still becoming better versions of themselves. Just like me. After the dinner, my parents invited me to their house. The house I'd grown up in. The place I'd been told to leave just 5 years earlier. It felt different. Not because the house had changed, but because I was no longer a failure living in their house. I was a successful woman choosing to visit her family. We sat in the kitchen where my father had given me an ultimatum. And we talked, really talked, about expectations, about shame, about the way love and judgment had gotten twisted together. I should have done better, my mother said. I should have fought for you. Maybe, I said, but I'm grateful you didn't. Because if you'd saved me, I never would have saved myself. That night, my father showed me his office. He'd redecorated it, and on the wall were articles about me, photos from the nonprofit events, a framed copy of the journal article about my journey. I'm sorry it took losing you to find you, he said. I had to lose you to find myself, I replied. While going through old boxes in my parents' house, I found letters. Stacks of them. My father had written to me after I left. Letters he'd never sent. In them, he expressed remorse, confusion, and slowly understanding. Dear Victoria, one started, I realize today that I pushed you away because I was afraid. Afraid that if you failed, it meant I'd failed as a father. So I tried to make you succeed by any means necessary. And in doing that, I made sure you couldn't possibly succeed with me. Reading those letters broke something open in me. He'd been struggling too. He'd been trying. He'd just been going about it all wrong. I brought the letters to my therapist. She asked, Do you want to share these with him? I thought about it. Sharing would mean admitting I'd seen his vulnerability. It would mean letting go of the narrative I'd built, that he was the villain and I was the hero. So I did. I brought them back and told him I'd found them. He was mortified. I wrote those to process, he said. I never meant for you to see them. I'm glad I did, I told him, because it helped me understand that you were trying. You just didn't know how. 6 years after being evicted, my father asked if I would help him with something. His company was struggling. They needed to restructure. They needed new ideas. I looked at him carefully. You don't need my help, I said. You need to remember that you're capable of figuring this out. Just like I figured out my own situation. But you're good at this, he protested. And you're good at what you do, I replied. You've just forgotten because you've been lost in shame. Stop looking for solutions outside yourself and start trusting yourself again. 6 months later, his company had restructured successfully. He called to tell me. I did it, he said. Not perfectly, but I did it. You were always capable, I said. You just needed to believe it. The nonprofit had grown so large that I'd had to hire a full team. And something interesting happened. People started asking me to speak. Not just locally, but nationally. About resilience. About family. About building yourself from nothing. I gave a TED Talk that was viewed over 3 million times. I was invited to speak at universities. Magazines wanted to interview me. And in every interview, I talked about my family. Not as villains, but as humans struggling with their own limitations. I talked about forgiveness not as weakness, but as power. I talked about how rejection can become redirection. My family watched all of it, and they saw themselves reflected in my story, not as bad guys, but as real people trying their best. My father had a heart attack. Nothing major, but enough to scare him. While recovering, he did something that surprised me. He asked me to come live with him for a while. Not to help him physically. He was recovering fine. But because he wanted more time with me. Because he realized that time was fragile. I moved back into my childhood bedroom for 3 months. And it was weird and beautiful and painful all at once. We had breakfast together every morning. We talked about life. I helped him understand the digital world. He helped me understand business in a way that nobody else could. By the time I moved back into my own place, something fundamental had shifted. We were no longer parents and children falling into old patterns. We were adults learning to know each other. 7 years after my eviction, I got married. Not because I needed someone to complete me, but because I'd found someone who supported me through my journey. At the reception, my father gave a toast. He talked about being wrong, about losing his daughter and having to watch her become herself without him, about the privilege of being allowed back into her life. He cried. I cried. Everyone cried. And my mother, who'd always been more subtle in her emotions, squeezed my hand and whispered, "Thank you for forgiving us." "I forgave you a long time ago," I told her. I just had to forgive myself first. The nonprofit had now helped over 5,000 people. We'd opened 4 satellite locations. We'd trained over 200 mentors. And we were changing the way schools and families approached failure. My family had become part of it. My father consulted on business expansion. My mother ran the mentorship program. Even Marcus, who'd reconnected with his own purpose, helped with community outreach. We were all different people now, but we were building something together. 8 years after being kicked out, I sat in my office and thought about what I'd become. I wasn't successful despite my family's rejection. I was successful because of it. Because rejection had forced me to rely on myself. Because pain has made me understand other people's pain. Because being called a failure has given me the courage to define success on my own terms. My family hadn't meant to give me a gift when they evicted me. But they had. The gift of independence. The gift of discovering who I was when nobody was telling me who I should be. I called my father. "I want to thank you," I said. "For what?" he asked, confused. "For kicking me out," I said. "You gave me the best thing you could have given me, the chance to save myself." He got quiet. Then he said, "You're a better person than I'll ever be." "No," I replied. "I'm just a person who decided to heal instead of hate." 9 years after my eviction, I had a conversation with my therapist about where I was on my journey. "I realize," I told her, "that the whole narrative I built around my family was flawed. I thought they were villains. Then I thought they were victims. But the truth is much simpler." "What's the truth?" she asked. "They were just people trying to navigate parenthood with the tools they had. They made mistakes. So did I. And now we're all trying to do better." The story I told myself, that I'd overcome my family, that I'd become successful despite them, wasn't wrong. But it was incomplete. The fuller truth was that my family had been part of my journey every single step. Even when they weren't present, I was either running towards something or running away from something they'd represented. Real growth, I realized, wasn't about winning. It was about integration. It was about understanding that the people who hurt us often hurt us because they were hurting. And that understanding didn't excuse their behavior, but it freed us from being defined by it. I looked at my life now. A successful business. A nonprofit doing meaningful work. A family relationship that was real and honest and imperfect. And I realized I was no longer the girl who'd been kicked out of her house as a failure. I was a woman who'd learned that failure was just a beginning. That rejection was just a redirect. That the best revenge wasn't success in spite of your family, but the peace that comes from building something meaningful anyway. My family still lived. I still worked. Life still happened with all its complications and contradictions. But I was no longer waiting for them to approve of me. I was no longer defining myself by their rejection. I was finally free.